going to go over examples of these Western liberals, and Khanna and Pramila Jayapal will be used as examples in their interviews, what makes them as such. So let's get to the interview that Khanna does on Face the Nation. You know, when he goes on these interviews with corporate media, he says a lot of progressive sounding names, or at least in the corporate space, that is definitely progressive sounding. So a lot of people give him kudos for that. But let's see how RBN breaks down this interview he does on Face the Nation. And the way I describe it is, in the interview, he admits he is a Biden administration surrogate towards the end. How are you that, but at the same time, you're speaking about the uncommitted campaign? You're speaking about the people who are not supporting Biden. Like, you're speaking about Palestine. It's awkward. But anyway, and I think she brings it up in the interview for that point that I'm making here. Let's listen.
And we're joined now here by Democratic Congressman Khanna of California. Good morning. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Margaret.
I imagine you support the decision to airdrop in aid to Gaza. But this is only happening because an ally of the United States, the largest recipient of U.S. military aid in the world, was not allowing in the aid. And now that it is coming across the border, the distribution is a massive, logistically complicated and unsafe operation. Should there be consequences for standing in the way of U.S. humanitarian aid?
Yes, Margaret, there should. I mean, we should make it clear that we're not going to continue to transfer weapons, as I asked Secretary Austin at the hearing. But Margaret, look.
He didn't answer you.
He did not, but even you could tell from his testimony that he was concerned that we were continuing to transfer aid. Look, we can't transfer weapons. We can't continue to transfer weapons while we're transferring aid. That policy doesn't make sense. Here's the thing. Look, the killing of over 100 Palestinians who are simply going to a food truck to get food, whether by a stampede or by shooting. We don't know all the facts. There should be an investigation, but that has shocked the conscience of the world. And
you see, social democrat, Western liberal, progressive Democrat, that's all the same person. You see the weakness here. And let me see if you spot it. Listen to what he says.
Transfer weapons. We can't continue to transfer weapons while we're transferring aid. That policy doesn't make sense. Here's the thing. Look, the killing of over 100 Palestinians who are simply going to a food truck to get food, whether by a stampede or by shooting. We don't.
Now, this position, whether by stampede or no, this is by gunfire. Everybody knows that. But because the state of Israel, who you still support, came up with some bogus reason, you have to give Israel's bogus reason the same validity as the truth. When Khanna can say here, Israel said that it was mostly because of stampede, that story sounds ridiculously crazy and illogical. So we're not going to go with it. He could just say that. But he has to give lip service here. Because again, social democrats really aren't trying to go at the jugular of power. They're just trying to get power to do things a little bit more nicer. Let's continue.
We don't know all the facts. There should be an investigation. But that has shocked the conscience of the world. And my plea to this president, who I support deeply, is, Mr. President, call for a permanent ceasefire. There's too much suffering.
So he supports deeply the guy who is funding and supporting a genocide, and then he calls himself the person who's calling for a ceasefire. How does that work? How does it work for the Palestinians, Khanna, that you are calling for a ceasefire, but then you want to support and put back in office the guy who's supporting the genocide and refusing to call for a ceasefire? Let's continue. Just illogical.
And the release of all hostages. The policy of bear hugging Netanyahu has not worked. Reach out to some of the former Obama.
Here's another weak making them weak because they don't want to challenge power. They're trying to use the same talking point that the establishment has chosen to lean on. Let's separate the state of Israel from Netanyahu and just blame Netanyahu. You know why? Because he has like a 4 or 5% approval rating in Israel. He's on the way out, so they feel like they can throw him under the bus. Israel's been terrible
like Ben Rhodes, Tommy Whiter, who have been saying we need a new direction of policy. We need a permanent ceasefire, release of hostages. We need to call for a Palestinian state, a summit with our Gulf allies. The current policy is not working.
Do you believe truly in an election year that the president of the United States could be that head-on direct in criticizing the prime minister of Israel?
You see how that shocks the establishment system to think that our leader can call what Israel's doing a genocide, can call out the Netanyahu. She is saying, do you really? She's saying, like, you're in this business. You know how ridiculous you sound? Do you really think that's going to happen? That's what she's posing here. Let's listen to what he says in the rest of the interview.
Israel?
Yes. You know who was? President Obama.
Yes.
And he won 2 terms. And, you know, Ben Rhodes.
Mr. Biden didn't agree with when he was vice president.
Well, look, Ben Rhodes, actually, he texted me this picture of Wisconsin in 2012 with 2 days before the election. And they were a sea of young people out there, hundreds of thousands of young people. We need that base. I don't think in the head-to-head polling, this is the issue that is showing up. But I'll tell you, this is an issue for activists. This is an issue for organizers. This is an issue for young folks. And this is going to be a turnout election. And right now, they want a new moral direction for our nation and for what's going on. Everyone agrees Hamas is a terrorist organization. What they did on October.
Everybody don't agree on these 2 points, that Hamas is a terrorist organization and what they did on October 7th is a terrorist act. Everybody does not agree on that.
October 7th is brutal.
But this is another point that keeps progressive Democrats at the child's table instead of outside. They just want to be inside the house, anywhere seated. It's wall to wall. They just say, I just want to be inside. And they said, go sit at the kids' table. But this is the price of admission. You have to go with the establishment talking points on the main top issues, like Hamas is a terrorist organization and October 7th was a terrorist act. You can't defer. You can't go off that talking point. And social Democrats, a.k.a. Worthless Western liberals, a.k.a. progressive Democrats, they don't want to disrupt enough to be kicked out of the room and be put outside.
It should be condemned unequivocally. But the point is now it's time to get a permanent ceasefire and a release of the hostages. And the president can do it. With one call, he can do it.
Well, that we'll see. But on what you just went to from policy to politics, you are a Biden campaign surrogate.
Proudly,
you say.
You are a Biden campaign surrogate, proudly. How can this be? How can you be a proud surrogate of a person committing genocide that you're calling a ceasefire for? You see what social Democrats are willing. Think about what social Democrats are willing to do when they're advocating for voting for Joe Biden. They're saying that our democracy, this fake democracy that's leaving out tens of millions of people, our pseudo-democracy is more important than the genocide. There's no other way to make the case for Biden without that being the analysis. If you say, I will never support somebody who supports slavery, then you make a cutout and say, well, if this person who supports slavery is against this person, then I'll support the person who's like that. No, I don't think so. Anyway, let's before I go off on a tangent, I can feel it. Let's listen some more to Ro Khanna.
In announcing the airdrops, I want to play this soundbite for you because this is what President Biden said.
In the coming days, we're going to join with our friends in Jordan and others in providing airdrops of additional food and supplies into Ukraine, and seek to continue to open up other avenues into Ukraine, including the possibility of a Marine corridor to deliver large amounts of humanitarian assistance.
This was a big decision. This was a big announcement. And the President of the United States twice got confused as to the country and place where the aid was being dropped. He said Ukraine twice.
He
Doesn't
misspoke.
that concern you?
I just misspoke earlier when I said we need to stop.
Now, this is a side point that she's making, that he made a mistake, several mistakes in this interview. And then he said, I love how the people who are defending Joe Biden and his cognitive decline, I love how they try to point out how other people are misspeaking. The reason you're seeing a difference in the poll, even though their age is close, is because the age is not really it. People see a difference. So even if you compare Donald Trump misspeaking a name versus Joe Biden, because both of them spoke the wrong name or wrong date, that doesn't mean the reason they misspoke the wrong name and date is the same. People know Donald Trump is just stupid. That's it. He's just stupid. No interest in being intellectual whatsoever. And people can see that that's not the case for Joe Biden. And they pretend like, like it's the same. But anyway, that's what he's doing here. Another thing about worthless Western liberals.
Stop transferring weapons. I said aid. I mean, people misspeak on television.
This was the announcement of a major policy change.
Here's the thing. I have been very direct in criticizing the president's policy in the Middle East. I have spoken with the president. He is fully coherent. He is on top of details when I have talked to him.
Yeah, he's fully coherent. He just walks like his legs are about to give out. He just walks like this now, because he knows he might stumble, and he knows he's been coached to make sure you don't stumble, sir. So what he does when he walks, he's concentrating. Let me make sure I don't fall down. What's the guy, the molester guy from Family Guy? That's who Joe Biden is. The guy with the walker. Take the walker away. That's how Joe Biden walks. Like he has an imaginary walker in front of him. And y'all want to act, and these people want to act like people can't see that. I can clearly see this guy gingerly walking. Ro Khanna?
Just a couple of weeks ago. My view is let's focus on policy. Let's focus on saving lives.
Gotcha.
And he'll have the opportunity to make the case about his age to the American people. But I have confidence in that part of it. I believe what he needs to do is to stop the killing, the suffering.
Yeah. But you are also talking about young voters and progressive voters. And they see that. On the issue of the policy, in Michigan, we saw these two efforts to essentially protest against Joe Biden by coming out and voting uncommitted. In Minnesota, another Super Tuesday state, there's a similar campaign underway. Are we going to see something like that in California as well?
There are efforts on uncommitted in California, a number of other Super Tuesday states, and in Wisconsin. It's significant. I don't think, look, the president's winning overwhelmingly, and I don't think in the primaries, and I don't think this is going to affect his vote total, but it is going to affect his turnout and base. But Margaret, this is not just a political issue. This is a humanitarian catastrophe. Secretary Austin said over 25,000 dead. Our weapons.
This is where Ro Khanna is very good. Ro Khanna listens to social media. He listens to the phrasing, and he knows how to use language that sounds radical, but that sounds radical. Let me just leave it there. And I'm going to just rewind it just slightly so you can hear what I'm saying here. Maybe radical's not
Minnesota, another Super Tuesday state. There's a similar campaign underway. Are we going to see something like that in California as well?
There are efforts on Uncommitted in California, a number of other Super Tuesday states, and in Wisconsin. It's significant. I don't think, look, the president's winning overwhelmingly, and I don't in the primaries, and I don't think this is going to affect his vote total, but it is going to affect his turnout and base. But Margaret, this is not just a political issue. This is a humanitarian catastrophe.
They've been saying that part. This is not just a political issue. This is a humanitarian. Isn't that what Listen Michigan? Isn't that what the mayor of Dearborn has been saying on those interviews like several months ago? Ro Khanna sees that. And he picks up on how to talk about the subject, and he knows how to manipulate language. He's one of the best at it, in my opinion. I've talked about this before, how he pivots to progressive talking points a lot, even out of the blue. And we saw that in that interview, one of the interviews he did with Bree on Bad Faith.
Catastrophe. Secretary Austin said over 25,000 dead. Our weapons are going there. There's starvation that's taking place. There are reports that 58,000 more Palestinian dead within 6 months if we don't have a ceasefire. The president can get this done. The disagreement is Hamas wants a 4.5 month wait. Bibi Netanyahu doesn't want to have that long a ceasefire. Have the president in there, get it done. Become a peacemaker, recognize a Palestinian state, a two-state solution. And I think he can, and I think he can win back young people.
But just on the policy point, there aren't new authorities the president would need to halt those arms shipments. He has those authorities. He's choosing not to use them.
He has it, and he could call for a ceasefire. He can stop protecting them at the UN. There are a lot of levers. And I'm hoping.
You see how weird this is? The candidate that's preventing the ceasefire at the UN, the candidate that's supplying the weapons and funds, that's your candidate. But then at the same time, you're saying we need a ceasefire. At the same time, you're saying we need this humanitarian effort. This is the position of the Social Democrat, where they play both sides of the coin, of the issue. And first we started with Ro Khanna, and now we're going to move on to Pramila Jayapal, and it's for the same purpose, to illustrate the weakness and the worklessness of these Western liberals, aka Social Democrats, aka Progressive Democrats. So let's listen to Pramila Jayapal. And again, lots of good stuff, but then there's a lot of fence sitting, which makes them unreliable allies also.
As always, it is a pleasure. You just heard the picture painted by Matt Bradley, and you know well what is happening on the ground right now in Gaza. How are you viewing the airdrops that were put together by the Biden administration?
Well, Yasmin, it's always good to see you and good to be on with you. Look, I think that it's important that we get whatever aid we can into Gaza. And so I'm supportive of the airdrops, but I just have to say 38,000 meals. There's 500,000 Palestinians in Gaza right now on the brink of starvation. And the fact is that the United States has been continuing to fund with military aid this war on Gaza, and Israel is refusing to open the borders and allow humanitarian aid in. So on almost every count, I have been saying for some time that I was one of the earliest people to call for a ceasefire. I believe now more than ever, it is clear that this Israeli government, Prime Minister Netanyahu, does not share the stated goals of the United States.
You see how she's saying Netanyahu instead of the state of Israel? Because saying that the state of Israel doesn't share our shared goals, it has not been approved by the establishment. You can make that claim about the Netanyahu. The progressives are very keen on what's acceptable, and they walk that line so they're so alert about where that line is. That's a better way of saying it. Let's continue.
States of America, not on getting humanitarian aid in and ensuring that the least number of Palestinians are killed or injured, not in terms of a permanent two-state solution for peace that allows Palestinians and Israelis to live side by side with security and freedom, and certainly not in terms of the stated things that the United States continues to say. For example, if Israel launches this attack on Rafah, it is absolutely a violation of human rights, of international humanitarian law. And I think many of the things they've done already have been violations of international humanitarian law. And so I have been saying publicly and privately to the White House that it is time to make a dramatic shift in our foreign policy towards Israel.
Now, this is a point that is correct. And I do agree, a dramatic shift. Now, of course, the Social Democrats are that shift is not going to be the sort of shift that we would like, but I'm sure any sort of virtue signaling that the Biden campaign does, that the Social Democrats will say, oh, that's a good enough shift. Let's listen.
We need an immediate permanent ceasefire. We need to get aid into Gaza. We need to begin the reconstruction, and we need to force Israel to the table. And, we're talking about a different government for the Palestinians, a different government for the Israelis, where we can have a legitimate negotiation around what a long-term peace looks like in the Middle East.
Are they receptive to what you are saying, the White House? Are they receptive to saying there needs to be a major change in our policy towards Israel?
This is the $25,000 question that I remember Nick asking, maybe it was Marianne Williamson, something like it. Are the Democrats receptive to you requesting Medicare for all? Are the Democrats receptive to you saying a $15 minimum wage, which should be really $35 minimum wage? Are they receptive to your demands, progressives? Let's see what Pramila says. We all know the answer, though.
Well, I think you've seen some of the shift in rhetoric, but we need an actual policy shift. And we have leverage. I do not believe that we can say we don't have leverage when we are funding this war. We are complicit in what's happening, Yasmin. I mean, if you look at there's been reports showing that 83% of the bombs that have been dropped in Gaza are U.S. bombs.
So if we just didn't supply them with U.S. bombs, 83% less bombs would have been dropped. Let's continue.
These are U.S. military weapons. And so the idea that we are continuing to provide that funding to Israel as we see all of this tragedy. I mean, 30,000 Palestinians killed, 70%, that's over 20,000 of them women and children starving, pregnant women living in tents, unable to figure out whether or not they're going to be able to deliver their babies, no hospitals. I mean, this is an absolute horror, and we cannot just say, oh, I'm sorry, it's over the top, but refuse to do anything to get Israel to shift, or at least to completely distance ourselves and work with the rest of the Middle East allies to ensure that we have a long-term solution in the Middle East.
You say an incursion into Rafah would be a violation of international law. That is the only condition the United States has in giving continued aid to Israel. Otherwise, it is the only country that does not have conditional aid beyond that condition. So is it time for that to change?
Israel is the only country that the United States supplies unconditional aid to, according to this anchor. We all knew this. Unconditional, you have to ask yourself, why are they picking unconditional aid for this particular country?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There should be conditions, but I actually think we need to go further than that. We cannot continue to provide this aid. I think all of those conditions have already shown to be broken. And defensive aid is one thing, but offensive military aid that is assisting in the destruction and the killing of Palestinians is not acceptable. And it is undermining our global influence around so many issues, including human rights, but our broader policies around the Middle East and our allies in the Middle East. And so I really think that this is time for a shift. I think the White House is listening. I hope that that shift is going to come very, very soon, because I don't see Israel willing to recognize that even the stated goal of eliminating Hamas, this is not going to happen by killing tens of thousands of Palestinians and destroying Gaza and allowing for Israeli cabinet members to call for essentially the complete elimination of Palestinians in Gaza. That is just, it's horrific. And I think we have to look at the tragedy. We have to look at the fact that we do have leverage. And President Joe Biden is probably the only person, the United States is probably the only player that can make a significant difference with Middle East allies and with our European allies, most of whom are in the same place that I'm articulating today on your show.
You talk about the international implications here. There are domestic implications, and we saw that in Michigan. I was on the ground in Michigan talking to a lot of Muslim Americans.
So she spent a good chunk of time and said a lot of great things about what's happening over in Gaza and her analysis. Now, as we pivot back domestically and still sort of talking about what's happening in Palestine, but through the lens of uncommitted, meaning electoral. Let's see what she does here from this point.
American and Arab American voters, 13% voting uncommitted in the Democratic primary. And I know when Barack Obama was running in the primary, he got about 11% of that uncommitted vote. So this is something that has happened before. However, some of the people that I spoke to said it doesn't matter what, at this point, the president does. They're not going to be voting for him in the general. There is no way he can get them back because they felt this personally, right? They have lost family members, lost entire bloodlines at this point in Gaza. How does the president and his reelection campaign, how do they gain back some of those votes? Can they?
I do think it's possible. I think the timeline is short. I think very quickly we need the policy shift. Rhetoric is important. Language is very important. I'm going to be watching very closely at State of the Union also for what the president says on this and how he talks about it. But it has to be a policy shift. And then at the same time, we have to really rebuild the trust and the relationships between progressives in Congress, progressives across the country, progressives in key states. And we have to have an agenda that reflects a dramatic recognition that progressives are a major part of the coalition that allowed Joe Biden to win in 2020. It was a fragile coalition. We had a lot of structures in 2020 that made that work, including the Biden-Sanders unity task forces. We can't do the exact same thing this time, but I am in conversation with the White House about how we start to frame up what it is we are fighting for.
So, did you hear that part? And that's what that was my cue. She's in talk with the White House to help frame, to trick people. She's out here saying all those great things that she said the first half of this video. But she's in talks with the White House on how to trick people to come back. I doubt she's in talk for the White House to do a ceasefire. She just goes on TVs and hope that he sees a segment she does on the many cable news channels that's out there.
The deep threats our democracy faces if Donald Trump comes in again, but also what is President Joe Biden and what do Democrats push for and stand for both domestically and internationally. So it's going to be a long haul. I believe it's possible, but those shifts have to start now. And Yasmin, I just have to say, it can't be shaking your finger at people and saying, well, you should just vote for Joe Biden because he's better than Donald Trump. It's not going to work. It doesn't work with our kids. It's not going to work with the progressive base across the country. We have to respect where they are, the moral outrage they're feeling, and then we have to win back deliberately the votes of people across this country.
Congresswoman Jayapal.
So that's Jayapal. And her part of the segment was not supposed to be negative, even though I had some commentary. It was supposed to be about her being one of the few people coming out and saying, hey, there needs to be an actual policy shift